Hi, Stu.
Good afternoon, young man.
I'm not young. I'm old, decrepit, and falling apart.
Oh, no.
But I'm not as decrepit as some. Like, I don't know if you've noticed the latest pictures of Trump on the golf course where his legs are like splayed across. He can't even move. I don't know if that's just from his obesity, but it doesn't look good.
He spends a lot of time on the golf course.
Yeah. I bet he doesn't cheat either. But before we get into our normal discussions, and this week has been a particularly not so happy week, but, during this whole period in the wintertime, it's always kind of a strange period for me because, on March 8th, 2009, my spouse, Pam, she passed away from breast cancer.
Oh, dear.
And the last months of her life, she was struggling, and finally her body gave way to the disease. She was sick with breast cancer for over 6 years. And Isabella was 3 when she was diagnosed, my daughter. So a lot of people may not know this, but, I met Pam at Northwestern where I went to law school. And when I first met her, Stu, I thought she was a big nitwit. I was like, who is this moron, right? Because even back then,
Mistake.
Even back then, Stu, my first instinct is not to like people. I started to, get to know her, and I talked to her a little, and we were talking about Valentine's Day, and I said how that's a stupid, made-up Hallmark holiday, and how much I hated it. And she told me that if someone ever gave her flowers on Valentine's Day, she'd pop the heads off of them because she thought it was such an uncreative gift. And I said, gee, this woman has potential. And then she also appreciated when I was discussing it was a classmate of ours who I nicknamed Bowling Ball Head. Because she had a huge bowling ball head. And
you were honing your craft early.
Yeah. And so I discussed burying her with her head sticking up out of the ground, and we run her over with a lawnmower. And Pam loved it. She was giggling away. Many of my more earnest classmates thought I
was disgusted.
We really were. But anyway, I realized she had potential.
Yes.
But I really had no interest in any kind of serious relationship of any sort because, my goals when I was in law school were money, power, prestige, and a deluxe...
The simple thing.
Yes, the simple thing. A deluxe apartment on the Upper East Side with cherubs in the library spewing out gold as a welcome note. But what I found out about, and this is what really impressed me, was that she had paid her entire way through law school, and her parents provided her no support whatsoever.
Wow.
And she came from a very difficult upbringing, like a Horatio Alger type story. Her father physically abused her, and he stole the money she had saved from college savings when he divorced the mother, which she had been saving for summer jobs to pay for her college. But none of this really stopped her because she was at Northwestern. She had done very well in college. And, here she was. And it was impressive that she escaped this very, very difficult family background. And she was at the top of her game. We ended up moving to New York. And ultimately, she became a law professor.
Oh, yeah.
And she also had, her daughter, which she always wanted.
And a lovely girl that is.
Yeah, that's true. So, when Isabella was 3, when she was really getting all the things she wanted in life, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and it was a very aggressive cancer. It was already fairly advanced, and she went through the treatments and surgeries and hospitalizations that she went through during this period were horrendous, but she never wavered. She would never even take a cab up to Sloan Kettering. She refused. She would take the subway. You might like that.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And I was like, you're going to fall. You can barely walk. And then she'd be like, no. And it used to worry me that she did this because she wasn't well. But she was insistent because there was no way she was going to ever succumb. She never was depressed. She never really sat there and said, woe is me. Sure, there was a lot of tears during this period. Ultimately, the treatments just weren't working and it was unbearable. And that's how it kind of ended. But throughout this period, you have to say, the toughness that she developed in her earlier life, she used to fight her cancer. And she was here for Isabella's formative years of development. And that was very important to her. So after she died, obviously, Isabella and I had been through a very difficult period. We were both traumatized. And, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do and how I was going to navigate it because I was physically exhausted myself from the whole thing. And Isabella was just a young kid,
Right.
who had only experienced at her home, illness. And then death. So I was determined that I was going to show her that life is more than this. And one of the things we had discussed is, we were going to travel the world. We were going to do all the things we weren't able to do while Pam was sick.
Yeah.
And, Pam also, before she died, she told me and implored me that she did not want me to wallow in grief and she wanted me to move on. And she even gave me permission to, if I wanted to, find someone else, another relationship or whatever. But truthfully, I was never really able at this point to meet anyone because they would always get compared to her. And
oh boy,
it's hard to replace something like that, right? And sometimes you just say, like, maybe you're just better off single. All the losers in here who are up here. But anyway, during this period of recovery that Isabella and I went through and trying to heal from what had happened, we developed a very close bond, probably more so than a father-daughter did, but we were both trying to help each other heal.
Right.
On one of our first trips to Italy, we were in Venice, and this is kind of a crystallizing moment. We were looking in a gallery in Venice, and we both saw this painting that we liked. I didn't buy it because I said, I'm not spending the money, blah, 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 being practical, so to speak. You probably like that.
Yes, I do. Well, also the numbers you were probably talking about were way beyond, I'm guessing, what I would even think of.
It wasn't that much. It wasn't as much as your, expensive lunches in China. So later, as we walked around Venice, Isabella stopped me, and the subject of the painting came up, and Isabella stopped me, and she's like, she looks up at me, and Isabella has very blue eyes, and they're very expressive, and she said to me, Dad, you should buy the painting. After all we've been through, you should. What are you holding on to? It's only money. So when she said this, I was, it's a very wise and, smart thing that you would not expect out of a 9-year-old.
Yes.
But Isabella had lived more than a 9-year-old. But it also made me realize, perhaps not at that moment, but later, that, in some way, I think Pam must have known that her time was limited, even before she was sick. She insisted on having a kid, and she left me with the gift.
Yeah.
So, which was being the father, which really was my salvation during this period.
Wow.
So here we are, 16 years later, and it's not just a sad story because Isabella has done.
She's beautiful. She's wonderful.
I mean, she went to an Ivy League school. She graduated at the top of her class.
Success after success now in her initial years in the workforce.
Right. So she's been very successful, and she took this negative experience and turned it into a positive, and that's been good for me. And also, I have turned my life around. I'm certainly not wallowing in grief, and I have...
You're not going to call yourself positive, though, yet, are you?
Well, I am positive because I am after this experience, but I already was this before. Like Pam. Pam used to say she was a gutter rat who would survive anything. Well, Stu, I am a cockroach because I survived one of the hardest things out
Yes.
there. Not there's harder things you could do, but here I am. I am still feisty, still.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, this experience has shown me that like it takes a lot to knock me down, frankly.
I'm sure.
And I guess the only thing that will knock me down is when I get hit by a bus. But which hopefully won't happen. I hope it will happen to some of our neighbors. That was a joke.
No, you reminded me of something that I might talk about. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, that's later. But I just, Pam was basically an amazing person.
Yes.
She was inspirational in her battle with cancer.
Yes.
And I just want to say R.I.P. We miss you.
I think this is just enormously touching. I think it's wonderful to hear it from you. And I'm sure the listeners are surprised listening to you, that, not that you're able to do it, but that you're willing to speak as you just have. And they're used to, so many other kinds of rants coming out of your mouth that it's a shocker, but it's a beautiful shocker. Well, and so I told you, I'm sure, and I'll drop some of what I was otherwise going to say, and because these minutes are adding up and they're wonderfully adding up. I told you of the time I met your wife, your ex-wife, your deceased wife.
Deceased.
And the person I thought might be her mother, and Izzy, as I call her,
right.
in the elevator. I told you that, didn't I?
Pam, I remember she used to talk to you when she was here. You guys...
But, well, it's just interesting. I saw her one day in the elevator with a woman I took to be her mother.
The Strega.
And Pam had a cast on her leg, or something on her leg.
She was...
It wasn't a cast.
Right, she was with the crutch, because
Didn't have a crutch with her, but it was a foot thing. It was a whole foot thing. It looked cast-like.
Right, because she had her hip had been, the metastasis to her hip.
I said to her, as I sometimes say too much too soon, I said, "What's up?" And she said, "I've got cancer." I said, "Oh dear, I'm so sorry." And the conversation kind of ended there, and I got off at the third floor. But I was just thinking of, wow, a young child and cancer, and it looked, those circumstances looked very bad at that moment, the way she was acting and speaking. But it's, I had that moment there. It was very sad, very sad.
Yep. I mean, it was right here in this building. After it happened, we thought about moving out. I wish I had. Oh. God knows this place is going downhill like a sled in Aspen. But anyway, it's I don't know if I also mentioned, I've been working a long time writing a memoir.
Didn't know.
Yeah, I have completed most of it, but for the last chapter, which is kind of an ending, a wrap.
Wow.
It's a first draft. I don't know if it will ever see the light of day.
I'm sure it will.
I'm kind of stuck on the last chapter, but whatever. I've been working on and off for a while, but sometimes I get pretty good feedback on it because I've been in writing groups. Sometimes I was told by someone, this is the funniest thing. I was in this writing group and someone told me that I was an elitist and that I was a sexist, and I'm like, I'm not really a sexist, and I thought that was ridiculous, but of course I'm an elitist. Yes. I mean, I'm proud to be an elitist. I want the best. I want to be in luxury, bathing in luxury, and I want labels, and I want champagne. So who was what kind of idiot? First of all, how many people in New York aren't a little bit elitist?
I don't think I am.
Well, no, but you are in a different way, Stu, an intellectual elitist.
Oh,
of course you are.
No.
And those Chinatown restaurants that you eat in, it's all part of your reverse elitism.
I see a reverse elitism. Yeah. I just feel more comfortable most of the time in simpler circumstances.
No, I was joking. I don't believe you're really an elitist, but I mean, you live here. Everyone is pretty caught up in that game to some degree. But anyway, Pamela.
Yes. Thank you for letting all of us listen to this. That's got to be a difficult thing, but it was a beautiful thing.
Thanks, Stu. Well, let's transition.
Oh.
Let's transition to
Well, I'm just going to do one of these. I don't want to cause us to go a long distance over our normal supply.
We'll see how much time, and if we run out,
all right,
you can cover it.
I think I'm going to. Don't worry, I've got things out there. I'm going to talk. I am going to talk about a thing that's got some upbeat moments to it and some poignancy to it as well. And this is going to be about General Charles Brown. I'm really talking about a guy here who graduated from Texas Tech with a civil engineering degree. He joined the Air Force and climbed the ranks. He had 3,100 flight hours, mostly in an F-16 fighter jet. He had 130 hours of combat in the air. That's more than a lot of people ever see. And he commanded a fighter wing. That's a bunch of planes. He commanded the U.S. Air Force Weapons School. He was nominated by Trump on March 2, 2020, to be Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Nominated by Trump. George Floyd, another character in recent American history, tried to pass a counterfeit $20 bill on May 25, 2020 in Minneapolis. He was caught on the street by Derek Chauvin, a local cop. Floyd was cuffed and lying down on the street. Chauvin's foot was on Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes. Chauvin was convicted of murder, properly, I think, and sentenced to 22 and a half years in prison. General Brown is black. He admits that the Floyd case troubled him. And before he was confirmed unanimously as Air Force Chief of Staff, back in 2020, he issued an emotional, personal video message about racism in the military. He did not advocate anything. He didn't push for any policy. But what he did do, and I've listened to it, it's very touching, I find, but you can listen to this and see it as he says it online. You just Google him and with, Brown and video. But he laid out his personal history of having suffered discrimination, just fact after fact, unemotionally. But in total, it shows the picture of the life some have been forced to lead and how some have overcome it with grace and distinction. Brown was formally announced as President Joe Biden's nominee to become chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in May of 2023. Again, the position Brown had in the Air Force was the highest in the Air Force, and now the position as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff would be the highest in the military in our country. And he was confirmed by the Senate in 2023. Brown was fired by Trump on February 21, 2025. He had given 30 years of superior service to our country, to the Air Force. He was no DEI zealot, but he recognized wrongs that had been committed, and he obviously showed hope that this could change, but he was not out there to push practices and to push DEI. A few questions I would leave for David and for you, the listeners. First, what impact might the firing have on the willingness of blacks and other minorities to serve in the military? People like to see others like them in positions of authority and success. Second, we are way below appropriate manning levels in the military right now, and that disparity is widening. So when I talked about the willingness of others to join, we're talking about a difficult situation, and you don't want to waste it or hurt it or make it more difficult. I ask you whether you think Trump gave any consideration to this issue of before firing Brown. So I have those questions for you at all.
Well, I'm glad you kind of gave me General Brown's background a little more, because the way it was led to believe, and not necessarily in the New York Times, but in the, Fox News kind of hemisphere, that he was basically, promoting the DEI. And a matter of fact, our skirt chasing Christian coalition, drinking problems Secretary of Defense, I think, suggested that as well.
Well, and Trump even said at one point when he was starting to turn coat on Brown, he said, was this guy hired because he was black? He said that in public.
He's the one who hired him.
He's the one who nominated him. That's why I said that. Nominated him to be a top position in the Air Force.
I mean, I don't know if Trump is doing ketamine with Elon Musk when they're hanging out together. Perhaps his judgment is completely clouded. But obviously, this isn't the way to treat someone who served his country.
130 hours of combat in the air.
But this is what we've come to expect from this guy. And it is shameful. It's disgraceful. And perhaps we can fill the gaps in the military with all the white South Africans who Trump wants to come here. And he gave special refugee status. It's absolutely preposterous. And
it's sad. That's why I say it's a poignant thing to me.
Well, it's one thing to get rid of or to eliminate DEI, which there are merits.
I understand that.
Argument. I also feel at the time of the George Floyd attack, a lot of people felt appalled by it. But as you go back in time and look at it, you may have a different perspective about George Floyd because he had a long criminal history. And and the Democrats were in a rush to prosecute.
Yeah.
So there's issues about that. But at the end of the day, this guy said this contemporaneously with the George Floyd attack, which is, I think, what most people would have said. Now, I was shocked by it, but I've come to a little bit, I question the prosecution of the cop and what really happened, because I don't trust liberals in our adversarial system because they used it and they have used it against people who they politically.
Just a couple of facts that stood out to me when you go over this stuff. He was cuffed and he was on his stomach.
True.
And second, it was over 9 minutes. And some people were suggesting at the scene, do something else. Well, I don't have a problem with that. But also, if you listen to this video and you watch the video, I think you'll find it just compelling as to how he responded. And it wasn't in some aggressive DEI way. He said, here's what I'm thinking about. That's all he said. Here's what I'm thinking about.
Right. And he's allowed to think. At least,
that's all he said.
At least he can think, unlike some other people who don't act with logic and reason. But I mean, this is what happens. I mean, someone won with less than 50% of the vote. It was a bigger victory than his defeat of Hillary. It wasn't a mandate. It was a victory, and it was a convincing victory. And it was also a reprimand of the Democrats and how far they went.
With justification.
But he is drunk with this victory, and he's overdoing it. And this is one of the many examples. And I don't understand why he takes so much pleasure in firing people.
He's very vengeful. There's just this vengeful quality.
This is his own appointee.
That's history. He'd say, that was history. That was the end.
He at one point referred to Zelensky as a dictator and then retracted on it. But so maybe he does. He's obviously not functioning in a full capacity. I mean, what he does, and I'm sick of hearing what a great negotiator is, because so far we've seen no benefits from anything he's done. If anything, we've seen a tanking stock market and a declining economy. There's a prediction
and certainly chaos.
Yeah, it's just chaos and nonsense. And that all said, it is disappointing that we have such weak leadership in America, but he is just a chain of failed presidencies. I mean, his first presidency was unsuccessful. Biden was a disaster. And now he is not grown as a man, except his waistline. But on that note, we've spent a lot of time talking about the autistic baby daddy and his drug use and bizarre behavior. And I mean, it's fun to talk about him because he's so strange. I mean, he's really something out of a comic book. And I want to congratulate him. He had his 14th kid. Not like he
sounds like some basketball players that I don't want to get into color, but
yeah, no, but Elon does not look like a basketball player. He looks like someone who eats a lot of fried chicken. He's a rubbery nerd who's obviously
and brilliant.
I disagree with that. I think he's an idiot savant. There's a big difference. He doesn't have skills. I mean, he may have certain honed gifts, but as an overall pitcher, he's a defective human being.
That's something else to me.
But speaking of defective, originally, Stu, when I heard of J.D. Vance, the vice president of the United States, I was kind of impressed by his personal narrative.
Sure.
He had come from a rough upbringing.
Right.
He, he brought him to, he ended up graduating from Yale Law School. He's been very successful.
Very impressive.
He wrote a book. He was very impressive. Yes, he was. And, back a while ago, he referred to Trump as cultural heroin. He labeled him as obnoxious and accused him of leading white working class to a very dark place. This is what he said. It's not so long ago. It was like 2016. And then in private, he supposedly said Trump was America's Hitler, and he also deemed him unfit for our nation's highest office. Now, let's fast forward to today and that spectacle on Friday in the Oval Office. Vance obviously has demonstrated a level of opportunism and lack of integrity that I could never in a million years imagine. But I guess you get a little whiff of power and you'll do anything, because he wants to be the successor of, for Trump, and he is kissing Trump's ass like there's no tomorrow. And I'm not going to get into that Oval Office meeting with Zelensky, but Trump came off. I mean, it is true. I think Zelensky was also rude and did not show the appropriate respect. And he knew what that meeting was about. Yet he came to try to further negotiate publicly, which I don't think was a good idea. But at the same time, the two of them tag teamed him and were trying to antagonize him as well. Most notably, Trump's little lap dog, J.D. Vance, although he's not so little. I'm going to say this, he looks like a piglet.
I don't see that.
He's overweight and he looks rubbery, and he also plucks his eyebrows, which I find disturbing. So let's go over some of his outrageously ridiculous behavior. When the autistic baby's daddy's 20-year-old geek posted something on social media about normalizing Indian hate, you recall that he was fired, then Vance stepped in and said, we can't hold people to these catastrophic results just for one mistake, blah, blah, blah. Point taken. But I don't think someone who posts something like that on social media has the judgment to be navigating sensitive government information. But what's also ironic about it is Vance is married to an Indian woman. And this guy basically said we should be normalizing Indian hate. So Vance is willing to throw his own wife under the bus to kiss ass to the autistic baby daddy and Trump. It's disgusting. It's an embarrassment. And I think that he really did not equip himself well there. Now,
he had no serious managerial background at a high level. The organizations he was involved with were largely were minor in nature, and their financial results were not very good. And he has no diplomatic background. It's just not a person that should be there.
No, he is no Dick Cheney. Although I'm sure he would shoot someone in the face if it would impress Trump. And I think we already talked about the embarrassing amount, his behavior. I mean, he was really like a little lapdog snapping, like barking at Zelensky. It was so embarrassing.
And oh, by the way, it's Zelensky's second or third language. Give a guy some credit for being up there and under those circumstances. I don't go attacking when the person doesn't have the same capability of responding. I find
that is true. He can't speak English, and I can barely understand him. He sounds like,
I could understand him, but he's not speaking in his first language.
No, he isn't. And also, they criticized him heavily because he was not wearing a suit when he went to meet Trump. Now, yeah, I probably shouldn't be wearing a suit, but shouldn't the autistic baby daddy does not wear suits when he goes into the Oval Office? Why is it okay for him to disrespect Trump and have his little son pick his nose and wipe it on the Oval Office desk? Yet this guy is coming in like kind of a military outfit. He is a wartime president. He has been besieged. He's obviously traumatized by what's happened to his country.
I wouldn't even want him carrying a jacket and tie, frankly, when he comes here.
Well,
under those circumstances,
it's kind of a petty thing to raise, and it's hypocritical because they've got one standard for this guy because for whatever reason, these people seem to have this naive assumption that Putin is going to be our friend. Putin's goal is to reconstitute the Soviet Union.
Yes.
That's what he has openly stated. And he's been trying to, grab territory here and there. And this is part of that effort. Now, we fought...
A successful part.
Yeah, we fought the Cold War and won it under the leadership of Ronald Reagan, one of the greatest presidents of my lifetime. And that was one of the greatest bursts of freedom we ever had. Now this comb-over orange buffoon is willing to throw that all away, and then he thinks he's going to get a Nobel Prize for forces. Yeah.
Imagine people around the world, both politicians as well as the normal guy in the street, imagine what they're thinking and how disgusted many are and how worried some are and how unwilling they are to just pretend this will go away. They need to revamp their approach toward relationships with the United States. It's disgusting. It's sad.
Well, that's one further thing I wanted to note. On Fox News, because in reaction to this Oval Office meeting, both the Brits and the French have offered peacekeeping forces in Ukraine to defend any such peace agreement.
Wow.
In response to this, the lapdog, Vance, made the comment about them, that deploying 20,000 random troops from countries is not going to do anything, and it's more important this deal that is going to provide them with economic security. So he basically disregarded
a major commitment.
Right. And also British troops, as the Prime Minister of the UK noted, fought in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and they lost men there. So he disregarded the sacrifices of these.
He has no historical context, and he's just out there just to be a pimp.
Basically, no spine whatsoever, and he's rubbery enough to kind of be like Gumby. So the lapdog, in response to his dissing veterans, faced withering criticism from abroad and even here by his comments that were out of bounds. And so he tried to back off a little, and he backed off by saying that a lot of these countries don't have battleground experience. Well, it's clearly the Brits fought World War II with us and won World War II against Hitler. Perhaps we need to remind him of that. So it's really disgraceful. And
in the Battle of Britain, the Brits, among other places, the Brits showed their resolve under circumstances that are far more difficult than we've experienced in this country.
Right. So at the end of the day, Stu, as bad as Trump is, J.D. Vance is worse.
Very sad.
He's a disgrace, an embarrassment. He threw his own wife under the bus from racist comments. This is someone who will do and say anything to get ahead. He is the Hillary Clinton of MAGA world. And the only difference is he's probably had less plastic surgery and doesn't have the same makeup artist, because whoever does those eyebrows, it's disturbing.
And doesn't have the same background. I wouldn't put them in the same class.
I
don't.
I was kind of being sarcastic.
Okay.
Hillary was a failed first lady. She was a do-nothing senator and a terrible secretary of state. So she did have that experience. And not long that, she defended her rapist husband. But at least she defended her rapist husband. This guy didn't even defend his wife, and the wife sounds like a perfectly reasonable woman. So I guess maybe he's worse than Hillary is what you're suggesting.
Absolutely.
That's a hard thing to beat. It's a hard thing to beat.
I think he's jumped right over with. He hasn't had any of the accomplishments, and I believe she had accomplishments, and she made effort, and she was diplomatic. This guy just is. Well, yeah, he's acting without boundaries and without credentials.
Right. Well, he certainly doesn't have the judgment and experience to be in a position like this. But then again, neither does a good chunk of the people that Trump appointed. And so, on that note, disgraceful. And let's hope this guy blows up, because he should not be in higher office at all. On that note, I hope you'll tune in and listen to us on Apple and Spotify and Amazon, and we will continue with these discussions.
Bye.
Bye.